Alright, response video of that Too Sexy For You guy. Not a great name. He was a pretty obnoxious video. Haven't watched his other parts yet, just the one on fractional reserve banking. And I guess his response to Martin Mystic, whose response video was just bizarre. Got taken down. You know, he had a girl rubbing her, privates. Which doesn't really, I don't really see the connection to the economy, exactly. And then he did a little, communist propaganda film. Which is really irrelevant to anything I ever talk about, really. I mean, but whatever. He plays his little games. Because he thinks there's only two choices in the world. That you're either one of those good capitalists or you're a nasty communist. And there's nothing else in the world. Asshole. Anyway, just a big time waster is what he is. So I got one of my shitty little drawings here. This is a really shitty one though. Because, quitting the smoking thing and my brain isn't working and I feel like shit and I don't care and all that crap. So anyway, that looks good enough. You'll deal with it. Alright. So, banking. Alright. How to even start? Okay, so the idea is that there's a bunch of rich people get together, banker guys, right? And they have a pile of gold that they've acquired by whatever means. They decide to open a bank, and so they put their gold in the bank. They build the bank, and then they put their little gold bars in the bank. And the idea is then they say, okay, we're running a bank now, so let's have depositors. And so they get people to also put their money in the little vaulty thing. And they'll say, look, we'll give you some money back. You will give us the money, put it in our bank, and we'll give you a little bits of money back. And the idea is in full reserve banking on this gold standard bullshit, that the government can really only print money equal to the gold bars. So the depositors have to put in the money that represents gold. So let's say if you can only make so that's why this drawing's a little. Just ignore the depositors stuff right for the second. Just say you had gold in the bank that the bankers put in. The idea in full reserve banking is that you only print $1 for every piece of gold. Okay, so it's only the amount of gold you have that you can print money to go out for loans. You can't print any more than that. And that's it. And so then depositors can take those gold certificates, those pieces of money, and they can deposit them if they want. Or they can deposit their gold if they have some. But the idea is still only the gold can be represented by a money out, which creates a real huge problem because the money out has to also be paid back with the same kind of gold certificates. So somewhere you're going to have to make some more gold certificates, or else somebody's not going to pay back their loan for there to be a depositor. But that's a whole other issue, and that's probably why this whole thing fails. But anyway, and the idea that is that somehow this arrangement is productive banking. What happens basically is every loan ends up being secured by not only a deposit, but the original gold from the bankers. So now the bankers are in a position where they not only are going to demand interest on their gold holdings, but they're also going to want to make a profit on their business, so they're going to take profit too. So they're going to be taking, I don't know, yeah, these are the banker arrow. This is supposed to be an arrow going out. Sorry about that. My mistake in the drawing. This is the word profit, and this should be another arrow going to the bankers. So they're going to be making interest and profit. The depositor is going to demand interest, and this poor sucker who actually is brave enough to borrow some money, he's in a terrible position. He's going to have to pay all these interests, because there has to be double deposits in here. So there's two people to be paying interest to. So in fractional reserve banking, which basically happens is you just eliminate the banker's holdings. So just say the bank holds nothing. Just wipe out all the gold bars, and the depositors put some money in. And what happens is the bankers basically lend every bit of it they can, up to a tiny reserve, a tiny amount they leave over, just to protect against somebody coming back into the bank for their money. So now all you have to do is pay the bankers their profit from running the bank, and you just have to pay the depositors interest. So now interest rates are going to be lower, and so this guy stands some chance of paying the money back. And in fractional reserve banking done with the Federal Reserve Bank, what's happening is the Federal Reserve Bank is pumping money into the bank in the form of deposits. So what the Federal Reserve does, if it wants to get more loans out or more money into the economy, it basically just buys a deposit account with the bank, and it basically buys a U.S. bond. I mean, it sounds stupid, one branch of government buying another branch of government's debt, but that's what the Federal Reserve can do. So they basically give them cash that they print to buy a U.S. bond sold to them by the bank, and that becomes a deposit in the bank. So now that money can be lent out, or that money can be held as the reserve. So if the reserves get too low, that's one way the Fed can put more money into the banks, get the reserves up higher, or they can just put the money in, deposit it to create the opportunity for more lending out to keep interest rates low. And we have to remember that, as Too Sexy for You idiot said, there has to be this thing called collateral. Banks want collateral and make loans because they're not going to make money if they don't get their money back. And so these little X's represent collateral. And so that's another thing. Without reserve banking, you have to recognize that that's another thing that's just going to be tied up in the bank. It's not going to be doing productive work. It won't be doing anything. So you'll have gold plus the deposits. Well, some of those you'll lend out, and all these assets. So you're just locking up a bunch of productive investment capital in a building that will be able to do nothing productive in the economy. I mean, theoretically, you want to stimulate as much production in the economy as possible, and this is how you do it. Obviously, when you have an economy controlled by the wealthy, you want to try to get as much of this investment capital out of banks as possible, so people have an opportunity to produce, and then other people can consume their production, and that's sort of how life works. So like I said, this isn't the best drawing, but in fractional reserve banking, there is no fraud. I mean, there is still the most of the loans are collateralized. There are deeds for all this property, cars and houses and all that kind of stuff. And those deeds were even held at a bargain price, because when the bank takes in a house loan, for example, somebody buys a house, the bank gets the full value of the house. And so whatever down payment the person paid, the bank is holding the value of that down payment. So they have the house plus, in the sense that they only put out part of the money. They don't put out the full value of the house. The person buying the house puts down a down payment. And so they have extra value, theoretically. But obviously, if you have a huge crash in the housing market, then these assets are no longer worth what the bank put out. And if their people aren't paying them back also, it becomes quite a bit of a disaster. But in theory, there was nothing wrong with what bankers were doing if one had any expectation that the housing market would stay in fairly good shape. They were collateralizing the loans. It was perfectly sensible to loan the money. I mean, maybe not with the small down payments, and maybe not in the circumstance where you kind of knew the economy was doing something, that couldn't go on forever, that housing couldn't make people millionaires forever. I mean, buying a house has essentially become a way of becoming a millionaire, which is kind of silly because it's not hard work. Buying a house is not 30 years of hard labor, so you really shouldn't get to be a millionaire just because you bought a house. So right there, we should have known something was wrong. But anyway, what else needs to be said here? Alright, so I'll just go back to the regular camera. So he brought up 2 points that were really dumb. He said banks should be run like pawn shops. And then he pointed out in his own video that they charge preposterous interest. And that's exactly my point. If we went back to a gold standard, or required money to be created based on locking gold away in storage somewhere, that's exactly what you'd have. You'd have 15% interest rates on very secure loans. It would be useless banks. They'd be horribly exploitive of people who needed to borrow money. So it would be a disaster. And then he pointed out how CDs are only paying 1.7% interest. And that's right, because there's no risk to a CD. It's a certificate of deposit. It's like you can't get a more secure deposit. It's FDIC insured. It's the whole 9 yards, and so it's not risk capital. So you're not going to get 12% for not risking money. I mean, why should you get paid interest if your money really isn't going to get loaned in any real sense of the word loaned? So I don't think there's much else to say. But all banking is fractional reserve banking. I mean, the idea is that somebody puts their money into the bank, okay, and the bank lends their money out, and you end up with a deed or some other thing in there that replaces the money you took out, but you lose the money. I mean, the deposit money has to go out, and you don't have liquid cash. And essentially what the Federal Reserve allows to take place in kind of a backward way is it basically allows all those deeds to be monetized and be reconverted into money so they can be reloaned out. And in theory, there's really nothing wrong with that. It seems quite sensible to get the most out of the bank as possible. And so the only question is, like I said, all this money has trails. And the only question is what is the reserve level? And I guess some people are arguing the reserve level should be 70% or 60% or 15%, or how low can the amount of money the bank has in its vault go? And the only reason why it needs the money in the vault, remember, is to pay out depositors. So if a bunch of people show up in one day and say they want